I'm going to go back in time, right before your very eyes. My clothes are going to change and everything. But I don't know if you remember in 2010, right when actually shortly after the crisis was supposedly over, the attack on the public workers really started most viciously against teachers, education workers. At that time, there were a couple of movies that came out, Waiting for Superman, and then there was another one, and then unfortunately, one of the sisters who was in the movie The Help made another movie called Don't Back Down or something with Maggie Gyllenhaal, and there were specials on CNN, on MSNBC and we saw this vicious attack in newspapers across the country against teachers primarily. As well as there were cutbacks, budget cuts at the state and local level, which were decimating the funds for public education as well as for other important public services. And a lot of money was being drawn away from public universities, of which CUNY is part of. And as a result of that struggle and the tuition increases which were happening across the country, students around the country began organizing. And the most militant organizing was actually done in California. That was in response to a proposed 32% increase of the tuition through the UC system. And the UC system is it's a statewide system, obviously. It's very much like CUNY. It was free, and at one time was the best education, higher education in the entire country. And the students were able to occupy a number of universities in UC Santa Cruz. I think Berkeley was occupied, and they actually named, I think the one in Berkeley, they named it after, was it Bunchy Carter and John Huggins? They named it after them when they seized that building and took it over. And as a response to that and organizing around the country, students in New York put forward an idea of calling a nationally coordinated days of actions to defend public education. And that began out of the Morales-Shakur Center at CCNY. I was a student at CCNY at that point and was organizing through the Students for Educational Rights, which was born out of the struggle against tuition increases in the late 80s when the students seized CCNY first in 1989. And they beat back Cuomo's tuition increases at that time. But CCNY has had this rich history, and I'll go through some of that, as actually was the first CUNY school, but it's had a rich history in struggle against, the attacks on public education. But I want to start with, the recent event of the seizing of the Morales-Shakur Center at CCNY. And last Saturday, early in the morning, the center was seized. If you've ever been there, there's a big red door, and then there's a black fist on that door, and above that it said the Morales-Shakur Center, and it had a picture of Assata Shakur and Guillermo Morales on the door. That was taken off. The books and everything in there were taken away, the computers, the books. There was a library there where they would lend students books. A lot of different activities went throughout it. They had an English language learners class. They had a prisoner writing fund. They actually won through the Students for Educational Rights. Despite the fact that students pay student fees and education and technology fees, the school began charging them to print. And it was the Students for Educational Rights out of the Morales-Shakur Center that actually beat that back and won students the right to print papers freely. There was a struggle waged out of that room, which kept the library open when they wanted to close the library at CCNY, and a lot of different things throughout history and recent history. But the public safety, of which is, I think, the third largest police force in New York City, went and seized, and they are armed. I think at Lehman and Bronx Community College, they are armed with guns. Most places they have batons, pepper spray, and other means for which to brutalize people. But they moved everything out of that building, and they changed the name on the door, and they called it a career center. And this was not just something that happened because of what I have a problem. I should just leave this alone. And for some reason, I got to fidget with it, and it messes up. So I'm sorry. And a student who was a former graduate of CCNY happened to come there and saw the next day and saw what was happening and began calling people and sat down in front of the door and began calling people to alert them of what was going on there. And he was arrested and brutalized by public safety as people were arriving. And the NAC building, which is where Morales-Shakur Center, was actually locked down. So no students who were in the building could leave, and no students could enter. Now it's not fine. It's a midterm week. So because it's midterm week, students have 24-hour access to the library and to that building, but they were denied that access for several hours. And it was only as more people began to arrive and to protest and demand that it be reopened that the building was reopened, except for the Morales-Shakur Center. So Monday, which was the next day, that was Sunday, the day after they had seized the center and converted it to something else, there was a protest called, and that was the one that I went to. And I went to there because I used to organize there and have fond memories of organizing there, and I know the value of that center. And there was we started out in the plaza of the NAC building outside, and it was, a rally of about 150 people. But then something magical happened. There was a fire drill. I don't know if it was planned, but the fire alarms went off, and people poured out of the building, thousands of people. So if you see the pictures of the rally, you see like this sea of people going as far as, and it looks magnificent. And hey, why not use it? I mean, whether they were there for the rally or not, they got treated to a rally once they got outside. And in response to the people pouring out of the building, we weren't allowed amplification system, so we used the people's mic and began talking directly to the people that were gathered. And after doing that for a short while, we marched around to the second level to try and gain access to the door which leads you into the Morales-Shakur Center, which we were denied. It was a partial lockdown again of the NAC building. But something else magical happened. A door just magically opened. And we went into the library and, weaved around, and got into the rotunda of the NAC building and occupied it. People's magic, I tell you. Revolutionary magic. We do believe in magic. Magic that comes directly from the people's will, or someone actively engages in making magic happen. So we occupied the rotunda of the NAC building and held a people speak out for a couple, I think for about 45 minutes to an hour. And this wasn't, this is not necessarily the beginning. It's not the end. It's not the middle. It's somewhere in between the beginning and the middle, because this struggle to save this center has been going on for a very long time, since they won it. So, and there's been there's been a few other protests since then, in response to the closing of the center. And there's a meeting tonight, and there's actually another planned protest on Monday at 12:30. This coming Monday. So, but I want to talk about this. We don't want to make it seem like it's an isolated event, because it wasn't. They didn't just say, "Oh, we need extra space." What the administration is saying, "Oh, well, there's a career center. It outgrew its, and we needed, an auxiliary space for it, and it just happened to be this space because it was upstairs from where the." No, it's not as simple as that. This was calculated. This was a calculated move to quell dissent on CUNY, and there's a reason why they wanted to quell dissent at CUNY, because of what they have planned for the CUNY system. As most of us know, I don't think it's a secret to any of us here, that the center got its name from fighters for liberation of oppressed people, specifically Guillermo Morales, who was a Puerto Rican independentista, and who was captured by the state and was able to flee and gain asylum in Cuba, as well as Assata Shakur, who was captured by the state and framed up, but was able to see herself free through a people's struggle, and has asylum in Cuba. And some of us have met her. I met her in 2004. And after, her valiant struggle and her desires to be home, her desires to be here, this is where her home is, but she's denied that right, and they've increased the bounty on her head to $2 million, the FBI has. But it was a thing to see her dancing and to see her laughing and smiling after everything that has happened throughout her life. But this center was won through struggle. In fact, if you walk into the building, there was a big sign that said this space was won through struggle. And it was won as a result of the 1989 seizure of CCNY against Cuomo's budget cuts. And it has played a crucial role in developing students' political activism on campus. Actually, I forgot to mention, both Guillermo and Asada went to CCNY. They were students at CCNY, and they were activists on campus at CCNY. But it's been the CCNY has actually been, and where a lot of the student struggles have been launched throughout the CUNY system. It was a haven for struggle against the Vietnam War and the draft, and it was the beginning of the struggle to win open admissions in the CUNY system. At CUNY, as a system was begun actually at CCNY. It was called Free Academy. That was where the first school was built, and it was a school for working and immigrant people at that time. But in 1969, in Harlem, 92% of the school was white. Only 2% was black. And that 2% represents, I think, about the highest percentage of black students at any of the CUNY schools. And the 92% is a low percentage of white enrollment at CUNY schools. So it was that struggle for open enrollment, that led to students seizing 17 buildings at CCNY, taking them over, and it led to other occupations throughout the CUNY system, and they won open admissions. And not only did they win open admissions, but they won a Black Studies department and a Puerto Rican Studies department. And that's very much a part of the lore. If you go to, if you went to the Morales-Shakur Center, if you did not know about that particular history, you learned it by looking at the walls and looking at the different materials that they had on the history of the CUNY struggle. Like I said, there was the 1989 takeover, which began there. There was the 1991 takeover that began there. And throughout its history, there was many, many years of organizing that happened there. But so the center was born out of 1989 struggle, and it has been under attack constantly, and it has always been named the Morales-Shakur Center throughout its entire history of existing there. But in 2006, shortly after the New York Police Department murdered Sean Bell, and in response to the organizing that was happening around the city, they went and they removed the Morales-Shakur name off of the center. And at that time, there were the Daily News had printed articles, the New York Post had printed articles attacking Guillermo Morales and Asada Shakur, calling them cop killers and saying that CCNY is celebrating cop killers. Fox News had a special on them and denigrating the students and student activists and say, how dare they do this? And there was this whole thing that was whipped up, to slander not only these liberation fighters, but also to slander student activism on campus. And part of the reason this is being done right now is because CUNY is changing. Drastically, right before our eyes, CUNY is changing. Since, for a very long time, they've been cutting, it's a public institution. But for a number of years, they've been cutting back on public funding for the school. There's next to none coming from the city level, and they've cut state funding for CUNY by 42% and replaced it with tuition increases. Tuition has increased since 1989 more than 100% at CUNY. The past 3 years, it has increased by about, I think, 40%, no, 20% in the past 3 years alone. Past 4 years, sorry. It has increased 20%. Right now, CUNY is facing a $300 incremental change every year that was implemented in 2011 until 2016. And every time there is a cut at the state level, they replace it with tuition increases. And so they want to replace that public funding of the institution with students having to pay more money. So this is really, and like I said, CUNY used to be free, and it actually wasn't until they won open enrollment about 7 years after when they actually started charging tuition. At that time, I think there was some sort of nominal fees from books and things of that nature, but there was no tuition. And in 1976 is when they instituted tuition, and the increases are really denying the right of the most oppressed and the poorest workers of actually gaining a higher education. This is a way to lock out people of color who've given so much of the culture to that school. And it's, we all know that it's workers who actually build and maintain the buildings, many of them people of color who maintain the schools and keep it running. But this is why, this whole history and the fact that CUNY needs to change is why they're so violently attacking these students. You don't, not only do you have that, but you have the proposal to create tiered programs and tiered schools, elite schools throughout the CUNY system. They wanted to implement this thing they called FIA, I think it was the Public Higher Education Empowerment, which would give the Board of Trustees the right to increase tuition without it having to go through the state legislature. Now, they weren't able to pass that, but they're trying to repackage it and do it again. They've reintroduced ROTC on campus, which was kicked out. I can't remember what year they were kicked out, but they were kicked out a number of years ago, and they reintroduced them back before they even voted. The Board of Trustees actually even voted on it. ROTC was back on campus. At the same time that their teachers on campus for 4 years have been teaching without a contract. And most of the teaching is done by adjunct. Teachers who have to go to 2 or 3 schools throughout a day and are receiving poverty wages to teach. And while they're paying these teachers these poverty wages, they offered David Petraeus, Death Squad Petraeus, $200,000 to teach at CUNY.
3 hours a week.
3 hours a week to teach at CUNY. And when the students heard of that, they began organizing to get him off of the campus. He teaches it's at Baruch, right?
Yeah. He teaches at Macaulay's.
At Macaulay's, okay. And he's a war criminal. I mean, we all know his history. We all know the U.S. has used death squads throughout the history of maintaining imperialism in different periods, right? So it wasn't a creation of him, but it was a policy of his in Afghanistan and Iraq. But it has been used throughout Asia and Indonesia. It's been used in Latin America. Wherever the U.S. has had imperialism, has had its claws, they've used this to torture and terrorize people, to destroy people's movements for freedom and against imperialism. But in response, and we have to see that like this having him, this fits into this changing CUNY, having David Petraeus there, having ROTC there, the quelling of dissent, because they, as capitalism, as the crisis of capitalism, gets deeper and deeper and deeper. The values of the system to maintain this imperialist system, this decadent system, in order to do it, that they have to teach students these values of this decadent, brutal imperialist system. And so that's why they need to actually change it and defeat any dissent against any of their policies on campus. Because they see it as being not necessarily a place, it's not keeping up with the mission of the original CUNY. It's no longer for the poorest immigrant, or was never really for oppressed people. It was primarily a white school when it began, but it's no longer even that, a school for working class people to lift them up and give them a right to higher education. It has ceased to become that, and even more every day it's ceasing to even have a shred of that, that it started with. So there's been a lot of organizing because of this changing CUNY. And not only the organizing against the attack, the seizing of the Morales-Shakur Center, but organizing against having Petraeus on campus. And these things are coming at the same time, and there is a relation between why they moved on the center at this particular time and the fact that the students who are organizing against Petraeus and to defend the 6 CUNY students who were arrested and brutalized at a demonstration to call for him, to not be allowed to teach there. They have been meeting out of the center there, some of those students, to defend them. So this was happening at the same time as well as there have been meetings there to get the ROTC off campus, because it's part of a long-term goal to militarize the campus, as the mission of the CUNY system changes and continues to change. So this is what the students are facing. This is what the people of New York are facing. Not only this changing situation there, but the fact that this board of trustees and the administration in CUNY are getting even more vicious, and they're trying to defeat the students and the faculty as well. Now, the board of trustees themselves, even though we used to go and try to shut down their meetings, and we were successful a number of times. We were able to shut down the Baruch campus. I don't know if comrades are actually, I think John Catt was at a few of those demonstrations where they locked down the Baruch campus and didn't allow students to get in there. We were able to go in and disrupt, their meetings and their proceedings as they wanted to try and pass this schedule of tuition increases. But these people don't represent the people, the students, or the faculty at CUNY. They're millionaires. The chancellor of CUNY makes $500,000 a year to preside over the CUNY system. $500,000 a year, while they talk about they have to, increase tuition to provide for the funding of the school because of the decrease in public funding. They have these people who are making these exorbitant amounts of money who don't actually represent the interests of the people who use the school, the people who work at the school. So I'm sorry. So one of the ways that they are actually using now to begin to because there's a number of different things that are happening within the CUNY system that are coming up that I want to make people aware of as we defend the students and help organize against this latest attack against them. But one way in which they are actually stopping people by having these militant attacks is they're trying to pass this. Let me see if I can find it here. They're trying to pass this policy called the Policy on Expressive Activity. And what this is they're seeking to restrict and criminalize dissent on the campus, where you have to get permission, 24 hours, give 24-hour notice and get permission to have any demonstration, and where they want to create special places that you go to hand out literature and flyers. Whereas you used to be able to go as long as you could find students, you could hand them things out. You have to have special permission and a place to go to actually hand out these flyers. And they want to pass this at November 25th at the next Board of Trustees hearing. So one of the things that students are actually doing is to begin to organize a response to this next hearing to stop this from going forward. Because it means that students no longer have a voice. It means the faculty no longer have a voice to express their dissent. It means whatever policy that they come up with, the Board of Trustees, and try and pass, that the students just have to let it happen if they can't get permission to have a protest on campus. And we see that throughout New York. Without a permit, you can't have amplified sound system. And whenever we get a permit, what do? They put us in cages. Protest zones. This is what they want to create on CUNY campuses. Protest zones for you to go, and they will put you away from where the student population is. And then who are you talking to? You're talking to yourselves because the students aren't there. This is the CUNY that they are creating. But I think that the immediate thing right now that the students are actually organizing against, that we need to be and support them for, and that is not just this individual center, not just this individual case. What this represents is the struggle of students for their voice and for their dignity. It represents a struggle to fight back against the administration and the ruling class's idea of what CUNY should be and what we need CUNY to be and what it should be and what it has been throughout its history. And that's why this has to be the line in the sand. That's why we need to say that this far and no further, and we actually need to push them back further. Not only just push back to create more student space on CUNY, but to push back tuition, to make CUNY a place that has real open admissions. Once again, to make CUNY a place that's open for people in the community. Because you go to a CUNY school now, and if you don't have an ID, you can't gain access. There are turnstiles. They swipe your ID. You know, they can actually deny you access to a school. If they have your name, they can deny you to come into that school if you've been arrested on campus before. To come into buildings. It's open space, some of the places that have campus, but to go into some of the CUNY buildings. This is the place that they want to create. And so that's why we need to struggle. And I believe that the students will win and get their center back. I don't think it's just as simple as them walking away and allowing this to happen, because they see the writing on the wall. Especially Black and Latino students who have fought throughout the history of CUNY to even have access to it, to have equal access to the facilities there. And it is in Harlem. CCNY is in Harlem, and though there's gentrification there, it is still a Black enclave in Harlem. It is still a community of oppressed people, other oppressed people as well. Latino, Southeast Asian people live within that area. It is an area of oppressed people, people who have lived their lives struggling for their dignity and struggling for their right to survive. So you can't just take away a school that in 1969 was renamed Harlem University, and people are just going to go away and not going to fight for it. So I don't believe that that is going to happen. So I would invite everyone who is able to come out to the next protest on Monday, which is October 28th at 12:30 in the afternoon, to be there with the students. And we don't know what's going to happen on that particular day. Something else magical might happen on Monday. You don't really know at City College, but there are definitely the people who very much want to and very much feel that they need to make magic happen. And it might happen on that day, and if it doesn't happen on that day, I'm sure it will happen shortly afterwards. And we have to be there to support them and to show the students that we stand with them as revolutionaries, that we know the history of this center, and we support the revolutionary liberation fighters for which it is named for, and we support the ongoing struggle to make CUNY once again a public institution that is free, with open admissions for all people throughout the city of New York. So all power to the students of CUNY, all power to the workers, and all power to the people.